Yeah.
Did you get a chance to watch it at all?
I watched it all. I watched it
Okay.
all. I was up late into the night.
Okay.
Very late into the night here watching
Okay.
it. Extraordinary. I mean, on a scale, the dwarfs everything I've seen. And the other thing is, well, we're mentioning this in the program, but the sheer precision, the superb marching
Mhm.
of the Chinese soldiers, which is beyond anything you will find anywhere else. I think maybe North Koreans can do it, but no one
Mhm.
else can.
Yeah.
And well, I'm not a military man, but many military people have told me that you can tell an awful lot about an army and the morale of the army from the way the soldiers march. And
Mhm.
well, there it was.
Yeah. Yeah. What's your general impression now? I know, I'm not a military person, and you always say you are not a military person.
No,
But just the little thing that I read after the military parade, people are commenting on some of the gears, the
yeah,
weapons that show
yeah,
there. Well, what my impression is, it's still very like defense focused.
oh yes,
So like the one that talked a lot about this YJ series, which is a hypersonic it's called anti-ship missile.
yeah,
Now, from the name, it sounds to me it's a defensive, right? It's a anti-ship. So if you have ships,
no,
I guess, including aircraft carriers circling around China, so these are the YJ missiles will be the one to target that. Yeah, as long as you don't send ships provoking China, you should be fine. You shouldn't be afraid of these weapons, right? If it's defensive.
well, that's exactly right. I mean, that seems obvious. I mean, it goes without saying, I'd say, and this is altogether true.
Mhm.
I don't myself have any doubts about this. Um, if we are talking about Taiwan, and
Mhm.
some of this talk about Chinese aggressiveness always originates from
Mhm.
discussions about Taiwan. What I always remind people in the West is that the West recognizes that Taiwan is
Mhm.
a part of China.
Yeah.
The aggressiveness that people are talking about is the aggressiveness of some people in the West to split Taiwan
Mhm.
from China.
Yeah.
So even in relation
Mhm.
to Taiwan, any steps that are being taken by China is a protection of its internationally recognized territory, which by definition makes it defensive.
Yeah, and plus people never mention that Taiwan actually doesn't exist as a entity, if you
No,
want to claim it's a country, the name Taiwan's own constitution calls it Republic of China.
well, exactly.
And in their own constitution, the Republic of China should cover the mainland and the Taiwan as well.
Well, absolutely. Yeah.
So nobody even talking about, they always say in Taiwan, make it some kind of a country. There has never been a country called Taiwan. Taiwan,
No.
for a while was occupied by the Dutch and then by the Japanese. For the most part, it's always part of
Yeah.
China, including today. If you don't want to recognize Republic of China has say to that, you recognize
Yes.
Taiwan as a country, it's called the Republic of China, right? So
Absolutely, absolutely correct. And by the way, because I once knew somebody who was from the Republic of China and was a supporter of it,
mhm,
a Kuomintang
uh-huh,
supporter of it. I remember there's a woman, she once showed me the map of China,
mhm,
which showed that the true capital of China, according to these people, was Nanjing.
mhm, yeah,
And it showed the boundaries of what this person considered to be the Republic of China, which of course included the island of Taiwan and the entire territory of the People's Republic of China,
yeah,
and by the way, of Mongolia as
yeah,
well.
yeah,
So I mean, yeah, it was quite interesting. But I mean, but what she was expressing, and she was connected. I should make it clear that she was connected with the authorities. I'm going to call them the authorities,
mhm,
but these are the Kuomintang
mhm,
authorities in Taipei. She was setting out what I believe it still is actually the official
mhm,
territory
yeah,
that this entity claims, claims for itself.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, people are not aware of this, and it never is talked about, but there it is.
Yeah. And there's even in the Republic of China, the so-called Taiwan, their parliament, actually, they have representatives from different provinces in China. I know somebody, my mother has a friend, her father is the representative of Henan, for example, for that parliament. So nobody talks about that.
Well, and the other thing they never talk about, and as you know, I take a great interest in Chinese culture and in Chinese painting, which is that, of course, if these people now say that they are not part of China at all and that they have nothing to do with China anymore, then why don't they return all the treasures of the Palace Museum back to its original owners in China? I have never, ever heard them do that, or anybody ever suggest it. But I would have thought that was absolutely obvious, because in that case, it doesn't belong to them.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah. They robbed it. Yeah. They robbed the mainland.
They robbed it. Yeah. Exactly.
Steal it. Yeah. They should return it. Yeah. But they don't do that, right? So
no.
Now, Trump has some interesting reaction to this whole thing. This is what he posted on his Truth Social. He said the big question to be answered is whether or not the presidency of China will mention the massive amount of support and blood that the United States of America gave to China in order to help secure its freedom from a very unfriendly foreign invader. Many Americans died in China's quest for victory and glory. I hope that they rightfully honored and remembered for their bravery and sacrifice. May presidency and the wonderful people of China have a great and lasting day of celebration. Please give my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un as you conspire against the United States of America.
This is typical Trump. I mean, it's full of anger and sarcasm.
Don't you think he's a little jealous? Don't you think
well, he's hugely jealous. I mean, it is absolutely jealous. And I'll tell you something else. I mean, of course, we're talking about the parade in China. And can I just say, I mean, the sheer scale of it, and it's incredibly impressive in every respect. And I mentioned, that the soldiers marching, the way that they march. Well, compare that with the parade that Donald Trump staged in Washington a few weeks ago. And I mean, you see there the almost painful contrast. And I can't help but think that Trump, who cares about these things, must have felt that acutely. Now, as for the Truth Social post, I mean, it is absurd and indeed offensive at so many levels that I don't really know where to begin. I mean, we have been hearing about the American war against Japan. I mean, when do we ever stop hearing about it? Yeah. When do the Americans ever stop talking about it? When do we ever stop seeing films being made about it? They're all over the world. When in the West do we talk about China's role in the war? Hardly ever. I can tell you, I mean, amongst educated British people, amongst my friends, I doubt that there is 1 in 50 who knows that China was not just an ally, but a key ally. I mean, it is a totally forgotten story. So for an American president who knows perfectly well that in the United States, nobody in the United States, well, nobody, I don't say nobody, but very, very few people in the United States recognize China's contribution, in which the Chinese people paid a price in tens of millions. For a president of the United States to say that China should spend all its time and energy recognizing the American victory, for which America paid a price in the hundreds of thousands. I mean, it's just absurd. I mean, it shows how completely out of touch he is. And well, I think people in China are far too experienced by now in dealing with the Americans to be angry about this. They must be aware that this is what the Chinese do. But it is ridiculous and objectively offensive as well.
Well, there's several points. One is Xi Jinping gave a speech during
Yeah.
the parade started. This is what he said. He said, "We express our sincere gratitude to foreign governments and international friends who supported and helped the Chinese people in resisting aggression." So he did name, thank everybody. It's not just the United States. The Soviet did a lot too. And I think that Britain also participated as well. So there are many countries who was against the Japanese. And China actually invited the Flying Tigers, those pilots they were mercenaries, but they did fighting, supporting China in fighting against the Japanese, and some of them were killed. So China always invite them for anniversaries, them and their offsprings, their families. This time, no exception. They were invited to participate in this parade. So it's not like China has forgotten these people.
No, of course.
They also invited the Russian pilots who were killed and their families. But here's the thing. Yesterday, September 2nd, is the official date that the Second World War ended. Now, if the United States thinking that it contributed so much, so tremendously, or maybe the United States might even claim that they are the one who defeated the Nazis and the fascists, there is absolutely no celebration of that whatsoever.
No.
So before you judge China to remember it, does Donald Trump remember it himself? The United States fighted the Japanese, the fascists, the Nazis. United States doesn't do anything itself to remember all these heroes died, fighting Japan, right?
No, I mean there is the Americans obviously they pour out films about this and all kinds of things of this kind. I mean, Hollywood movies and all this, which, by the way, very much focused on the American side of the war. But you're absolutely right. If you're talking about the real war, the actual war that was actually fought, the Second World War, the Americans overwhelmingly know nothing about it. I mean, their understanding of it is formed very much through, as I said, film and cinema. Obviously, they're academics. There's a lot of academic study in the United States about the Second World War. Some of it very good, by the way, because, I was a historian. But the generality of the American people are certainly not educated in it. And if I can say something else, by the way, as somebody who used to have quite extensive interactions with the US and traveled there, I've always found that if it comes to wars, the war that the Americans most commemorated when I used to go there most extensively was not even the Second World War. It was, in fact, their own civil war of the 1860s. I remember noticing when I went to American bookshops that if you went to, bookshops, you'd see shelf after shelf after shelf after shelf of books about what happened in the 1860s. And there would be far less about the Second World War. And most of it would be, by the way, about the war in Europe, which I suspect must have been painful for some American veterans. And but the war against Japan not really covered very much at all. Now, that was a while back. I haven't been back to the United States for many years. So, of course, it may be that it's changed. But certainly the Americans, as you rightly say, do not commemorate the true victory in the Second World War, which is the one on the 2nd of September. We don't do that in Britain either, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Isn't that strange? You see, like you said, that in Hollywood, they always portray the American soldier very brave, fighting this and fighting that to keep the world peace and, rescue everybody, the hero. Okay. At the same time, I think because geopolitical, now they want to align Japan to fight China. So they kind of like do not want to talk much about the World War II. It's not recently. August 15th is the anniversary, 80 years anniversary when the U.S. dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. This is the spokesperson, the State Department spokesperson was asked about that. Do you have anything to say about that? This is what she said, Tammy Bruce. She said 80 years ago, the United States and Japan concluded a devastating war in the Pacific. For 80 years, the United States and Japan, however, have stood shoulder to shoulder to safeguard peace and prosperity in Pacific. Now, I understand that she's trying to not to say too much things to offend Japan, but the U.S. embassy to China translated into Chinese. There's a whole lot more here, she said, very offensive, and posted on the social media. And lots of people in China were offended by that. The people were angry because this sounds like they were the ally against the bad things in the World War II, almost like they are together to fight something.
Well, that is absolutely correct. I mean, the American perspective today about Japan is that it's a good country. Basically, you know, it's on our side, and they don't really want to talk about the fact when they talk about Japan, when they discuss the war in Japan, it all revolves around Pearl Harbor. The fact that the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, all of the other things that the Japanese have been doing, mostly in China, but in also some other places as well, that is not something that the Americans talk about very much at all. I mean, again, if you're talking about the war, the Second World War in the East, there are huge numbers of American books about Pearl Harbor. But books about the war in China, well, they do exist, but they're mainly academic works that are read mostly by people who make it their job to study history. It doesn't filter through to the wider population. The reason this is the case, of course, is because the Americans don't want to talk about the Second World War as it was really fought. Because if they did, then it would become unavoidable that the two countries that bore the greatest weight of winning the Second World War was the Soviet Union and China. Those are the countries that did the real heavy lifting. Those are the countries that defeated the Germans in Europe and the Japanese, because as we've discussed in many programs, the bulk of the Japanese army throughout the war in the Pacific was fighting China, not the United States, by far. And that was where the greatest number of Japanese military casualties by far took place, a fact which very few people recognize. Now, I should say that when Xi Jinping met with Putin, I find it very interesting that he actually spoke about the fact that we were the two countries that bore the greatest burden. And I mean, to some extent, I think he's also telling the Russians, well, you know, please remember, we did play a role here too, because, you know, it's fair to say that in the Soviet period, the Soviets also downplayed China's role. They don't do any more. I mean, I'm fairly well informed about this. And over the last 10 years, there's been a sustained effort in Russia to educate Russians about China's role in the Second World War. But anyway, there was, I thought, something else here too, which is that Xi Jinping was not only saying that we were the two countries that fought and won this war together, and we were the main ones, but he's challenging the distortions of history. But he's also saying that we together are the trustees of the victory, that we defeated Japanese militarism and fascism together. And we have an obligation to those of our people who did this before us not to betray what they did. So it's something, it was language that I can tell you immediately the Russians would understand. It's very interesting the way he said this. It shows that Xi Jinping at least understands the Russian mind very, very well, and which is going to bind the Russians more closely to China, because they now feel that in this most important event in their history, and it's impossible to overstate how important the Second World War is for the Russian conception of the world. They now understand that the other great nation was not Britain, it's not the United States, it was China. So this is a very interesting set of comments, and a very, very clever one. And a true one too, by the way, because the cleverest things are always the things that are true.
Well, it's interesting that now if you say that Soviets are trying to downplay China's role as well, is it can we say that the West, Europe in general, want to downplay the whole Asia Pacific areas
Yeah.
war? They want to make it World War II is mainly about Europe. Like
Yes.
almost like what's happening in Asia is almost like a sideshow. Do you think there's some parts of
Oh,
that?
there's no doubt of it, and of course the Soviets did this as well.
Mhm,
Now, obviously, during the period of the tensions between the Soviet Union and China,
mhm,
and the 60s and 70s, I mean, this was to some extent policy, but of
mhm.
course, the other thing is it's understandable in a way because so many more Soviet soldiers fought and died
Yeah,
in Europe
mhm,
than in Asia.
yeah,
But the Soviets did have a part to play in the war in Asia. I mean, they fought the Japanese. It's almost unknown fact, but they fought the Japanese in 1939.
mhm,
They were supporting China to a certain extent in the 1930s as well. And in 1945, they launched a huge operation in Manchuria,
mhm. Yeah,
which
yeah.
defeated the Chinese, the Japanese, not the
Japanese.
Chinese,
Uh-huh.
the Japanese there. And so this was a major, this is something that strangely the Soviets tended to downplay.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, of course, they're talking about this an awful lot more.
Mhm,
And again, it binds them more closely to China. And Putin said something very, very interesting. And this is he also said this. This is in his interview which he gave to Xinhua. He said that if China had not been resisting Japan in the way that it did in 1941, if it had not fought this heroic war against Japan, then the likelihood is that we would have faced a war on two fronts because Japan would have joined Germany and would have attacked us.
mhm,
So again, this is a very, very interesting thing. The Russians have, in the past, again, have tended to downplay this,
mhm,
but now Putin has said this. Again, it's true.
mhm.
And again, it's the kind of thing that will, Russians will understand. I mean, the Russians lived the World War II history all the time, and it will make them feel China was our ally. It was a key ally. It made our victory possible, our own victory possible. Not just our victory,
Mhm.
but as our survival as a nation possible. So you could see how all of this is coming together in all sorts of very, very interesting ways,
It
very
is.
important ways.
Yes, and yeah, but yeah, the Europeans and Americans want to make the Asian
The,
parts of
yeah,
the world
absolutely,
a sideshow.
absolutely,
So
absolutely. The British, absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely, they do. Even though they were present in the
yes,
Far East as well,
yeah,
but they
as
do.
well. Yes.
They talk about that less and less. It's the war in Europe that really
Mhm.
matters. It's the war in Europe, which I mean, they built up Churchill into
Yeah.
this titanic figure, and it's all about Europe with him. And of course, with the French and the Germans, it's also all about Europe. And the war is fought in Europe. And of course, the Soviets did play a part. We can't completely disregard that. And the Chinese, were they even involved? It really is actually, it's terrible. It is terrible that this happens. I have to say something else, by the way, and this is something not just about the celebrations in Beijing, which were extraordinary, but about the meeting of the SCO in Tianjin as
Mhm.
well. And I'm doing this program, having just been speaking and doing a program with Professor Sachs,
Mhm.
Professor Jeffrey Sachs. And he had many very interesting things to say, by the way. And we'll talk about them and about China and India and a lot of things. But as he was talking, and drawn from the things he was saying, it really did strike me that one of the things about all of these meetings in China was that China and its people and its government and the other leaders who came to China are living in the 21st century. In Europe, we are still living in the 20th century.
Yeah.
Our conceptions of economics of politics, of what matters in international relations, is still entirely 20th century. You know, we're still talking about, you know, moving troops. You know, can I just say something? I mean, when you saw this, this is just the Chinese army on parade. I was on the Chinese army. It's just that's fraction of the Chinese army that was parading through Chang'an Avenue and on Tiananmen Square. I mean, that is probably what we saw. Was probably bigger than all of the European armies combined today. I mean, the British army, I'd heard that it has 40 operational tanks. I was corrected. The true number is 25. How many tanks did you see on display in this, you know, parade? But, you know, we still talk about that as if we're big, important countries, as if we're great powers, as if it is in Europe that everything ultimately happens, where everything matters. We're still going to move, you know, fight the wars on the old battlefields. We're stuck in this world that is over, or at least that is receding. And it's the same is true in economics, in technology, in science. I mean, you know, we're still focused on the industries and the technologies of the past. I don't know. One of the things that's actually, for once, it was a story that gained attention in Britain, that China has built the bridge, a motorway bridge, the highest altitude ever. I mean, it's incredible engineering achievement. And as people notice that the China did this in less time than it takes Britain to build a motorway bypass in one of its own cities. I mean, you know, again, the contrast. But our leaders just don't get this. They still behave as if we're living in the world of 1960. I mean, it's all 1970, and that the politics are all, for them, constructed around this. And this is the thing that came through to me most about these meetings in Tianjin and in Beijing, the celebrations in Beijing, the confidence, the sense of freshness, the sense of energy. And by contrast, we in Europe now look so stale and old and clinging on to, you know, the strategies and the policies of the past. And again, it came through very clearly in that discussion, listening to Professor Sachs. And I thought about this, and as I said, I've come straight out of that program, which is why I'm bringing it up now.
Yeah. Now, before we talk more about the SCO, one more thing is that in Trump's tweet, he talked about, you know, China's conspire with Russia, with, you know, Kim Jong-un, you know, against the U.S. So Russia, Kremlin already responded saying Russia is not plotting against the United States. On the other hand, the United States now is talking about more sanctions, right, against Russia and against Iran. So to me, it's really not for this country get together. Yes, they are talking about how to resist, but it's not plotting against the United States. They simply have to survive. They have to self-defense. So they need to have ways to against all these nonsense sanctions and tariffs and all these endless, you know, hostile actions against all these countries. Don't you think they have to?
You're absolutely correct. I notice again so much the American view. If the Chinese and the Russians and the North Koreans and all of these other countries meet and celebrate a victory, a huge victory, a great event, if they also have, you know, conferences, it's about the Americans. They're meeting to talk about the Americans. Always, everything for the Americans is about themselves. They still imagine that the entire world revolves around them, and that, you know, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin have nothing else to talk about than how we're going to hurt the Americans in some ways. I mean, it's preposterous. It's absolutely Absolutely silly. And of course, that's exactly what the Americans are going to do. They're going to impose more sanctions and they're going to impose more tariffs. What do I always tell you? That everything with the Americans always comes down in the end to China. Trump has this meeting with Putin. He thinks that, for Putin, it's the US that he's really interested in. He's going to be one of us. He's the leader that's going to be really attracted to the US. We put on this tiny air display with your few fighter jets and a bomber. And then, of course, what does Putin do a few weeks later? As he always said he would do, he goes to China, he goes to the SCO, he goes to Beijing, he attends the celebrations. And Trump is furious because you could sense this is the anger. And of course, that means that Putin is betraying me. He's not doing what I want. So I'm going to impose sanctions and tariffs and other things on him. And of course, China, as again, Xi Jinping so correctly said, it's if you want our help to deal with this, we are there to help you. And it's not just one side, it's not just China giving out, what it can. China obviously also wants help from these countries. I mean, it wants gas and oil and all the other things, that grain and all that. So what the Americans are doing is they're bringing everybody together. And it's incredible that they cannot see this.
Don't you think secretly Trump probably want to be there?
Well, of course. And what prevents him going?
Exactly.
What a good thing if he had indeed gone. You remember we were talking about this possibility a few weeks ago. What stopped him going? Why couldn't he have been there? Why couldn't he have met with Xi and Putin and all of the others and done the deals and opened the trade and moved things forward? Again, they don't want to be, because they have to be the center of the universe. So the only parties they want to attend are the ones they themselves hold. They don't want to go to somebody else's party. They don't want to admit that China does a better parade than the one they do. I mean, it's infantile. But so much of the West today is. Trump is not the only one, by the way.
I still find it's incredible that the United States doesn't make a bigger deal out of this whole event. If United States believe United States saved the world from World War II, from the fascists, from the militarists, from the whatever, why doesn't the United States make a bigger deal? United States is the one always trying to claim that they're the one who protect the peace, saving people, they're the hero. This time, World War II, they did the right thing. They were on the right side. But they don't talk much about that. I still find it's just
it is very strange. But again, it's all about the American pathologies and all of that, which are very, very complicated and very tiresome, by the way. I mean, having to deal with the country as powerful as the United States still is, which has all of these hang-ups and pathologies at the same time, is exhausting. And imagining that, the only reason why all of these leaders go to Beijing is to plot against the United States, it tells you so much about the way the Americans, and again, to stress, it's not just Trump, think about the world.
Well, there were rumors in China saying that Macron expressed interest to come. Now, it's just rumors, but Macron would be somebody like that. He always trying to stand out somehow. And supposedly the rumor is that he wanted to see if it's possible for him to talk to Putin, in that. So I think it's probably, there might be some truth to it. I don't know. But of course, eventually he doesn't come. There could be multiple reasons. For one thing, once Putin is there, I guess all the Europeans will not be interested at all to be involved. And Macron probably eventually decided this is not good. But there were rumors, just so you know. Okay.
Well, there we go. I mean, he should have gone.
Yes.
He should have met with Putin. But I mean, he could have gone and not met with Putin. I mean, again, by the way, I've already mentioned this. I've discussed this in programs and on a live stream. It is unbelievable that there was only one representative of the European Union there, who was the Slovak Prime Minister, Robert Fico, who's, by the way, incredibly brave leader to do this. But I mean, it is incredible, given the importance of China and the importance of the event that is being celebrated. At the very least, there should have been representatives, and not just, unimportant officials, but top representatives, prime ministers and presidents and kings going to this visit too. And it's shocking. And it tells you again so much about the world that we live in today that, they don't go.
Yeah. And Fico even gave an interview, short interview. He even said that. He said, I'm against the Nazi, I'm against the fascism around the world. So for that reason, I go to Moscow, I go to Washington, D.C., I come to Beijing, because we should be against these Nazi and fascism anytime, anywhere in the world. And he's correct.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
So
absolutely.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree.
He's very brave. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, the SCO. In general, I get the feeling when I see when Putin and Modi and Xi Jinping, when they met, do you feel like they're pretty relaxed? They kind of enjoy it.
I have said this very same thing on programs. I mean, it's a very interesting contrast. You see Western leaders together, and they all look angry. I mean, they always look angry. I mean, even when they put on smiles, you can sense that they're angry. I mean, look at Macron and Meloni, for example. I mean, it's fairly obvious that they dislike each other. Look at when the Europeans meet with Trump. It's obvious that they dislike each other. I mean, there's tensions between Ursula von der Leyen and Friedrich Merz as well, and everybody knows it. When Putin, Xi, and Modi were together, one senses a certain buoyancy. I mean, they're happy to be there. They're able to talk to each other. They find that they can talk to each other as adults. There isn't this constant, having to always be careful what you say, because if you say something wrong, it will blow up in your face or anything of that kind. I mean, they were enjoying their discussions. And I think India is on a journey, by the way. I've been saying this for some time. Professor Sachs has been saying for over a year that fairly soon, India, the penny would drop, and India would decide that this involvement in things like the Quad was a mistake, and that it would try to repair its relations with China. And Modi, I think you could see it. I mean, there was almost a sense of relief finally, that he was there in China, able to talk with Xi, able to talk with Putin, the three of them together. What was it? I think it's Chinese people who are saying the dragon, the elephant, and the bear. And, you could see it.
Now, the BBC has a lot of reporting about this, but like you said, they always think it's all about the West, right? So the three of them together, they put up a show, to show some kind of unity, even though they have differences. It's true. They are still like a border issues between India and China. And they're also always trying to say that the Russian and China is kind of like alliance inconvenience, it's not going to sustain and stuff like that. I don't think they're trying to put up a show to anybody. I think that they enjoy, each other's company, and they do have things they need to plan in terms of, how to deal with this tariffs and sanctions and I would say abusive of power, right? That to insert all these powers, forcing countries to do which are the things against their own interest and stuff like that. I think the West are reading too much into what they're doing. Don't you think?
Well, they're completely misunderstanding it. I mean, this comes back to what I was saying, that these people in Tianjin, these leaders in Tianjin and Beijing, are living in the present and the future. We are living in the past. We see everything as part of some great complicated geostrategic game, which is ultimately always about us. In fact, the Chinese and the Russians certainly I don't know so much about India here, but the Chinese and the Russians certainly have got to know each other very, very well in the last 20 plus years, especially I'd say the last 15. And I speaking from the Russian side, they've come to like the Chinese. I mean, I when I went to Shanghai back in 2017, the person who acted as my host was a Russian businessman who was working for a Russian bank. He loved being in China, and the people that he was with, all Russians, loved being in China. They were encountering problems because there were still difficulties in understanding of how each did business. But I've talked about this many times. But I've also told you how the Russians have always told me, if you negotiate with the Chinese, it can take a very long time. It can be very difficult. They're very tough negotiators. But when the deal is done, you can absolutely rely on the Chinese to honor everything that they agree. And for the Russians, that is incredibly important. So they like it. They like interactions. They like, I mean, I should say again, it's a while since I've been to Moscow, but Chinese restaurants are starting to open there. They like aspects of Chinese culture. I know there's been exhibitions of Chinese art and people have gone and been interested in these things. So the West is getting this all wrong. And the Russians, for Russia, China is a neighbor. It is not, a faraway land. I mean, it may be a huge country, but when you are in Moscow, you're very, very conscious that Vladivostok is part of your country, the same country, and that it is a neighboring country to China. So absolutely, I mean, on the Russian side, this is a long-term thing. Absolutely, it is a long-term thing. Now they're transferring their gas from Europe to China. This is what Power of Siberia 2 is. The point is, this was the gas that used to go to Europe. I mean, Power of Siberia 1 drew from new gas fields. Power of Siberia 2 draws from old gas fields that used to supply Europe, and new Arctic gas fields, which had been earmarked to supply Europe. All of that now is going to China. And there is in Russia a huge sense of relief, because finally we have a partner that we can deal with, not a partner that harasses us, that brings bogus legal claims against us, that conducts silly anti-competition policies against us, that tries to strong arm us into agreeing to third energy packages, which we've repeatedly said we don't want to be part of, that then looks the other way as our pipelines get blown up and then imposes massive sanctions against us. Finally, we have a partner we can work with and we can deal with and we like dealing with, and who is not trying to bully us. I mean, you notice again how careful Xi Jinping was to talk about the question of bullying, which I think the Russians are very familiar with because they've been bullied an awful lot recently. So from the Russian side, there's a sense of relief.
One more thing, the SCO happened is Xi Jinping proposed the creation of a SCO development bank. And China already proposed, I mean, there is already an Asian development bank, but that's mainly for Asian countries. But this is more broader. Again, now the West will see that as trying to replace the World Bank and IMF, but it's not, right? I think the West always mistake that. It's an alternative. It's not trying to replace anybody, right?
Yes. Well, we believe in competition, except when it's against us. I mean, if you want to, if you're so worried about this Chinese bank, which the Chinese, by the way, have a perfect right to set up. Why is China somehow prohibited from setting up a bank and doing it to facilitate trade and economic relations with other countries? But if you're worried about that, make your own bank better. Yeah. Improve your lending, your lending conditions, work hard and deliver a better product. But no, this isn't really about China wanting to develop competition and supply alternatives and do these things. It's all about us. It's about replacing our financial system with their financial system. A zero-sum game, which is the one we play all the time, and which the rest of the world is getting very tired of.
Yeah, exactly. I think this zero-sum game, this mentality the West has, they really need to get rid of that. They really need to change the perception. Somehow it's, your gain must be my loss. This kind of a mentality, I find it's really not 21st century thinking. I think.
No, so. You're absolutely. But that's exactly the point. I mean, what you are doing what we're doing in the West is that we frame everything around geopolitics, which has its origins, as I've discussed many times, in the conflicts in Europe, the interstate conflicts in Europe. But I mean, we see everything. We assume everything is part of this chess game, and every move that is made is part of a chess game, in which the ultimate objective is to win a geopolitical victory. China doesn't think in that way. Its history isn't like that. Anybody who knows anything about Chinese history can see this.
Okay, about the trade war. So there's some interesting development, right? The U.S. Federal Appeal Court ruled against Trump's tariffs. Basically upheld the lower court, the Federal Trade Court in New York, and saying this is illegal. The tariffs you have illegal. Now it's heading to the Supreme Court, which everybody expect that we'll head there anyway. Now, according to Trump, the reason the Federal Appeals Court ruled against his tariffs is because he said the judges who are against him are the Democrat appointee, mainly, I think Obama's appointee, and the other one, I think it's 7-2 or something. There were two people who did support his tariffs, and those are his, I guess, the Republican appointees. Now, if we use that logic, the Supreme Court has now 6 Republican appointees and 3 Democrats appointees. Now, if that's the case, then I guess the Supreme Court will support Trump's tariffs. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right. In fact, that's the universal consensus here in Britain, that the Supreme Court will find in Trump's favor. I have to say that I'm not an expert in this law, in U.S. constitutional law, but to me it looks absolutely clear that both the lower court, the commercial court, and the Court of Appeal are absolutely right. I mean, a tariff is a tax. The only authority entitled to impose taxes in the United States is Congress. Congress has not authorized these tariffs, so they are unconstitutional. And Trump relying on emergency legislation to impose these tariffs is to twist the meaning of that word far beyond any conceivable sense. So I think they're absolutely right, but I think the Supreme Court in the United States probably will come to that view. And in some ways, by the way, I hope it does, because I'll tell you what I think. I think that one of the reasons why Trump and other people in the US in his administration have been dancing around these bone-crushing sanctions that Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal have been talking about is because if the Supreme Court decides against Trump, then they can activate this bill. And they will then say that whatever tariffs they have imposed derive their authority from this specific bill, and that the tariffs have therefore been authorized by Congress. So we can impose tariffs on anyone and everyone anywhere around the world on the grounds that they're trading with the Russians in some way. And they might not be trading directly, but they can be trading indirectly or something of that kind. Now, I don't want to see that happen, because I don't want a legislative obstacle, or at least a legislative basis for this ever to be created, because then it will be much more difficult to reverse in the future. I mean, you'd have to get the legislation repealed, which we know how difficult that is. So I'd rather leave the mess in the messy way it is at the moment, and then a future president can just come along and, with a stroke of the pen, cancel all of these things. So, I mean, that's the only reason why, on balance, I wouldn't mind if Trump won this one. But it's for this very, very narrow reason, and for no other.
One thing I noticed, the Supreme Court is getting, I don't know, more and more messy in a way.
Oh, yeah.
In this case, I think everybody can see this is unconstitutional. It's illegal. Okay, what Trump is doing. But I find in the past, there are also some clear-cut cases. What the Supreme Court does is that it doesn't outright, go either way. It kind of like either find some procedural problems to send it back to lower court. They did that in the past. Or they would say, okay, you have, this are the problems we see, it's not appropriate. But in general, we don't want to overthrow the whole thing. So they kind of like almost trying to find a middle ground. Don't you think that's a possibility too?
Well, that's absolutely right. And that's exactly what the Supreme Court is doing, because the Supreme Court is becoming more and more politicized, and it is operating within a much more polarized political system, a more fractured political system. So they're making decisions in very politicized cases. And instead of doing what judges are supposed to do, which is follow the law where it leads them, they are doing the opposite. They're trying to shape or reshape the law to satisfy whatever political pressures are being exerted on them at any particular point in time. It's a further symptom of the decay in the United States.
Just to give you an example how messy this whole thing is, Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, he, of course, is pushing very hard on Trump's behalf for this tariff thing. His company, who right now, Cantor Fitzgerald, right now is run by his son, Brendan, I think it's Brendan Lutnick. They are betting against this, actually. They are offering a service to buy the tariff rights, which means, so if you are a company, you are paying tariffs right now, I give you 20 to 30% of whatever you're paying now. And to buy the rights, which means if it gets struck down, you will get your tariff money back, but that you will have to pay me. So if you don't get struck down, you will earn like 20, 30% of the tariffs you already paid. So his company, Cantor Fitzgerald, is now betting against the tariffs when he himself is pushing for it.
Yeah.
This is very American, isn't it?
It's very American, and I would call it corrupt, because ultimately it means that Lutnick wins whichever way it goes, which is very American too, by the way. I have to say, I mean, Lutnick is, along with Peter Navarro and Stephen Moran, these are three individuals that I find it very difficult to talk about them, because my feelings about them are so strong that it's probably better that I don't express in words. Lutnick, I mean, how could a person like that could ever become a secretary? I simply can't even begin to understand. Moran is now been put into the Supreme Court, the Federal Reserve Court. And well, Navarro is on Fox every day, persuading India that it would be even better to go and get even closer to China, because I mean the rude things he's saying about India are just off the scale. I mean it's just incredible that these three people hold the positions that they do.
Another thing is, I think a few months ago, the Japanese media actually reported that when they were negotiating with the US delegations about the tariffs, apparently there was so much chaos there that the Japanese was kind of like didn't even know what to do. So one example, like a Besant, Lutnick, and then there is a trade representative. His name is Jameson Creer. So the three of them would argue in front of the Japanese delegation because they couldn't agree on what they want. They were arguing in front of them. So this was the Japanese media.
It doesn't, well, I say unbelievable. I'm afraid it doesn't surprise me, but well, I didn't know. That's not been reported, by the way, in the media here in Europe. But I mean, it ought to be. I mean, these three well, even Besant himself, who's perhaps the least bad of them, but this group of people are, in my opinion, disastrous. I mean, Stephen Morand, back in the during the April retaliatory tariff trade war, I'm sure you remember, he wrote this absolutely crazy justification for it, which he said that one of the reasons why all these countries should be paying the Americans tariffs is because the United States provides them all with protection. I mean, straight out of Al Capone. I mean, it was just incredible reading this. And there it was, and it was official statement by the U.S. government, and it was published on the website of the White House.
Maybe China should use that as a way to get rid of all the tariffs, saying, okay, we don't need your protection. Get rid of all your militaries around us, military bases around us. So we don't pay the tariffs, the protection.
Absolutely correct. Yeah.
Yes. U.S. now seems like is pushing for early meeting between Xi Jinping and Trump. They're even talking about September. So now there's not an official report, but if you look at the Brookings institution, they just had an article called "The Countdown to a Trump-Xi Summit." So yes. I don't see anything in China's side saying anything like that.
No.
Do you get the feeling U.S. actually do want to get things going? Because the negotiation, they ended in August last time, and they were saying in 2 to 3 months, they're going to resume the discussion. But in the meantime, so for example, the soybean is a real problem now. The farmers, the soybean farmers, so they really want China to buy some soybeans. And of course, the rare earth is still an issue, etc. So I got the feeling U.S. is now want to have an early meeting with China. Either their delegation resume earlier negotiations, or maybe direct meeting Xi and Trump.
Yes, so. And objectively, I would support it. I would want to see the President of the United States and the President of China meeting and working out and ironing out all of these things, all of these problems. But of course, again, with the way in which the Americans do this, it makes it very difficult. It's like, I mean, it's well known that Trump was trying to get a meeting with Putin for months before the meeting in Anchorage happened. And then Trump imposes all these tariffs on India, and he apparently telephones India, Delhi 4 times, and he wants to speak to Modi and gets very upset and very angry when Modi doesn't want to speak with him. The point is that all of these countries want to talk to the United States, but they have to be in a position where they can talk about something. Nobody wants to be hectored and lectured and told what to do and bullied. And of course, Xi Jinping is going to take exactly the same stance that you would expect him to. He's going to say to the Americans, look, I'm happy to meet Trump. Of course I am. But before I do, I want to know what I'm discussing. I mean, what exactly are the Americans coming forward with? And is this something that I can realistically discuss in China's interests? Because China is the country, obviously, that I have responsibility for. Obviously, because China and the United States are great countries, and they have a joint responsibility in the world. We understand the importance of a meeting. But for there to be a meeting, there must be some point to it. I don't think the Americans ever get this, because I think especially Trump imagines that if he can meet Xi Jinping, through sheer force of personality, he's going to manage to get Xi Jinping, of all people, to come round to his thinking.
Trump in particular, he truly believed, he's art of a deal kind of a thing. But I find the U.S. President all a little bit like that. I think Obama also have this idea that he somehow is very charming. He could get his way, through personal influence. And I think Bill Clinton is a little bit like that too, don't you think? The US
Absolutely, absolutely. This is correct. I mean, the Americans place far too much reliance on charm, on their own personal charm, which they do have, by the way, and also at the same time on the their bullying and all of that. And they think that great nations like China, India, Russia will somehow fall for this, and then they always come away surprised and angry when it doesn't work. Now, if you I come back to what the Russians say about the Chinese, that that you have to work with them, and they're very, very careful. They look at every single point. You have to sort it out. But when you get there, you can absolutely bank it. That's what how the Americans should approach China. They should meet with the Chinese. They should meet with the Chinese in good faith. They should go through it problem by problem. They should sort it out. They should be very clear what their true interests are, not the fictitious interests of the geopolitical chess games that they always play. And then we could have a proper, real meeting between Trump and Xi, and no doubt the Chinese could do all kinds of things that would be really helpful. I mean, generally constructively helpful for the Americans, and the Americans could do the same for the Chinese, and the world will altogether be a better place. The Americans never do this. They want to rush in, impose their ideas, get the other side to agree to them, because again, for them, it's a zero-sum game. They treat negotiations as a battle towards achieving some kind of victorious outcome. And there's never any way that China will ever play that game.
It's very frustrating. For me, a Chinese American, I see both sides, right? I find, to me, it seems so obvious. Why don't you just drop all this nonsense tariffs, which is hurting the American consumers? And then in return, you will get the China to buy those soybeans and give you the rare earth you want. And now also they're discussing apparently buying 500 Boeing airplanes. I mean, all these will happen for benefit United States in a very profound way. 500 airplanes, a lot of jobs for years to come.
Yes.
And the soybeans, you're absolutely hurting those farmers when China is not buying any. All you need to do is to drop all this nonsense. Let's say, okay, keep 10%. I think that would the deal is done. Whether with you visit China or not, the deal will be done. Why can't they just do that? It's so simple to me.
Well, because we talked about all of those hang-ups and pathologies that we talked about, which get in the way. I repeat again, Sophia, that you approach this as a Chinese person does. There's a very, very pragmatic, realistic, practical way. And by now, it ought to be obvious that when dealing with Western leaders, not just the Americans, things are never that straightforward.
Yeah. It's very frustrating, so, okay. The war in Ukraine. So now the winter is coming. When we're talking about war in Russia, in Ukraine, we always need to talk about winter. So what does it mean for the Ukraine war now?
Well, it means that the Russians will continue their offensive. I mean, first of all, I should say that in this part of the world, September and October are still quite warm. Winter comes rather suddenly. You start to get. I mean, there's a period of heavy rain, which is usually towards the second half of October, and then suddenly the frosts come. So the pattern it works is that the war will continue very much on the same sort of style and tempo through the autumn, this September, October. Then usually there's a period of about 2 weeks when there's the rains and the mud, and movement slows. But then, of course, the frost comes, the ground hardens. Quite often the skies clear, and then the fighting resumes. And that was the pattern over the last 2 years. It is a misconception that the offensives, Russian offensives, will stop in the winter. They won't. Last winter, the winter that's just passed, the Russians made some of their most important gains during the winter. And I think that they still got at least 6 weeks of basically summer style fighting in the summer to do. And there's been some reports today that one of the towns that they're besieging, Kupiansk, is within days of falling. I suspect that Pokrovsk will fall pretty much soon after. Then there'll be a pause, as I said, when the rains come. And then the winter, it'll resume again. And we'll have more fighting in late December, January, February, unless there's a ceasefire, as there sometimes is over Christmas. But if we go back last year, the Russians captured the fortified town of Avdiivka in February. And then there was the big Russian breakthrough. And there was a big Russian advance through February and March, which were, winter months.
There doesn't seem like there's going to be any deal, right? That diplomatically, it's not.
No, we're in a deadlock.
Okay.
We're in a deadlock. I think that, again, Trump, as I said, as we discussed in previous programs, Trump oversold the process. He talked about the Russians having agreed to security guarantees for Ukraine. And it didn't work out what the security guarantees were. And I think it became immediately obvious that the Russians were thinking about something completely different from what the Americans and the Ukrainians and the Europeans are thinking. So that's all come to a stop. And then there's the idea of a bilateral summit meeting between Putin and Zelensky. And the Russians never agreed to that, as they made clear. And by the way, they are very angry that it was ever suggested that they had agreed to it. So at the moment, everything has come to a stop. Now, when these cities start to fall, when Pokrovsk and Kupiansk and another place called Siversk begin to fall, when it looks as if there's the military crisis that Ukraine is facing, it becomes impossible to deny it anymore. Then the diplomacy may resume, and there might at that point be more attempts of the Trump people to try to get the Ukrainians to start to see sense and to come to some kind of negotiated outcome. But the Americans themselves are all over the place. Some Americans are saying one thing, other Americans are saying other things. Trump himself changes his position literally from 1 minute to the next and from one sentence to the next. And I mean, nobody can be confident that this process is going to move forward anytime soon, even if there is a collapse in Donbass, which is now starting to look closer and closer. It doesn't mean that anything realistically would happen. If I have to say this, if the Ukrainians had sense, they would forget about the US. They would do what actually we talked about some months ago. They would call China and they would say, look, we need to end this conflict now. Can you help us? China would.
Well, Zelensky actually, after Russia's latest strike on Kiev, Zelensky actually asked China to basically saying you should interfere, you should come in. But he's the one who said, we don't want China to peacekeeping, So Zelensky also changing from one day to another, I find. What exactly do you want China to do? I'm not so clear.
Well, he wants China to tell Russia to capitulate, basically, which of course isn't going to happen. And when Zelensky talks in this way about China, he's not talking in good faith. I once thought that he might be, but I've come to the conclusion that he's not. He's doing this in order to put pressure on the Americans.
Okay.
To get the Americans to provide him with more help.
So using China to to get. Okay.
I think the Chinese have figured this out a long time ago, actually.
Yeah. Okay, so the Middle East, Turkey announced that I think the day after we talked last week, they announced they're cutting off all the trade economic ties with Israel. So what's your view on this? Why does Turkey all of a sudden, become very tough on Israel?
Well, and it took a very long time to happen, but I think that Turkish public opinion, or at least that part of the Turkish public that supports Erdogan, were demanding it. I mean, they're Muslims. They see what's being done to their Muslim co-believers in Gaza and in the other Palestinian territories. And of course, in terms of Turkey itself, it now finds itself in a direct conflict with Israel in Syria. So I think that this relationship between Israel and Turkey is fracturing, and it's taken a while. And I don't think President Erdogan particularly wanted to go here, but I don't think he feels he has any choice.
And also, the U.S. denied the Palestinian officials a visa to go to the UN Assembly meeting. First of all, are they supposed to do that because they're going to the United Nations, right? Not to the United States. So I'm not sure, this is the appropriate thing to do. But it seems very clear. Not only that, they also suspended lots of the Palestinian passport holders' visa who has the U.S. visa. So are they trying to stop the Palestinian from attending the UN General Assembly? That's what the US
I think it was an outrageous thing. I think it was a massive abuse of the US's status as the host country of the UN. I think it clearly violates international law. I think it's absolutely unacceptable. It is not the first time the Americans have done this. I remember during 2011, during the Libyan conflict, the Libyan ambassador to the UN was basically pressured into defecting and went over to the side of the American-backed opposition. So Gaddafi, who was still the legitimate leader of Libya at the time, the internationally recognized leader of Libya, and it should be stressed, recognized at the United Nations as the legitimate leader of Libya, appointed a new person to take this ambassador's place and sought to send him to the UN to represent Libya's interests. And the United States refused to give this man a visa and kept the ambassador who had defected in post against the wishes of his government. I mean, it's unbelievable behavior. And I believe they've done this since on a few occasions. They've denied visas. I know they've denied visas to Russian diplomats, or at least not denied them maybe, but been very, very slow in granting them. So, but this goes, what they've just done goes to a completely different level. And it's, I think, because of American anger, or at least Trump administration anger, that even European countries are now moving to recognize Palestine as a state. And the Trump administration and Trump himself are furious about this, and they want to prevent this. And I think that it also shows that, in spite of everything, all of the comments we've heard about tensions between the US and Israel, the reality is that the two remain bound to each other in absolutely, and that hasn't weakened or faltered at all.
Well, let's say if the Palestinians couldn't participate in this meeting, now those European countries who claim they're going to recognize Palestine, they still can do that, right?
Absolutely, of course.
Yeah. So
and the point
US
is,
cannot stop them.
The US cannot stop them, and eventually, of course, I believe I'm right in saying that it's up to the General Assembly whether Palestine is recognized as a state. If it is recognized as a state, then of course it has the right to proper, full diplomatic representation. And I don't think that will prevent the Americans from still preventing the Palestinians from sending ambassadors and things. But of course, it will become an even more flagrant violation of international law when it happens. One of the we go back to the SCO meeting,
Mhm.
I don't think one should understate the importance of Xi Jinping's global governance initiative,
Mhm.
because this goes directly to the point that we've just been talking about. I mean, one of the things that Xi Jinping was talking about is that we should respect sovereign equality.
Mhm.
We should respect states, and we should abide by international law.
Mhm.
Here you have a perfect example of the United States doing neither. It neither respects state sovereignty, and it does not abide by international law. And it does this at the very place, the United Nations, which is the center of international law.
Which the United States is the symbol, I guess, the post-war order that United States established, right?
Exactly,
Helped.
exactly.
So, okay.
The United Nations was established on American initiative.
Yeah.
It's the Americans who proposed it.
Yeah, it's so amazing that we're living in a very strange world in all kinds of ways. It's just,
Absolutely, absolutely. To put it mildly.
yeah. And another thing is the U.S. is striking, according to Marco Rubio and Trump also, that they strikes Venezuela drug boat, killing 11. Are they going to just do this to harass Venezuela, or do you think they seriously want to invade Venezuela?
Well, I'm going to say this. If you're simply intending to harass Venezuela,
Mhm.
I mean, the size of this naval force that they've assembled seems far out of proportion to doing that. And I mean, the cost of deploying all these warships on Venezuela's coast as well. I can't help but think that there is something more to it than this, and that some kind of military attack against Venezuela, another outrageous thing, by the way, must be in preparation, because I cannot see any other explanation why you would assemble such a powerful force in this way.
It doesn't make any sense. Why does the Trump pick up this fight? I don't understand. Okay.
I mean, but it's America. I mean, the Americans always feel that they must act and take steps and force people and bully them and threaten them and do all of this. I was reading a post that Lindsey Graham published, Senator Graham published, which was threatening Norway with sanctions because Norway's sovereign wealth fund was refusing some kind of deal with
Mhm.
Caterpillar, the American company, because Caterpillar has some connections to Israel.
Mhm.
So Senator Graham was absolutely furious about this, and he was warning the Norwegians of tariffs and sanctions and all kinds of things. But it's just the way the Americans are. As I said, the world is getting very tired of this.
Mhm.
And again, going back to the SCO and Xi Jinping's global governance initiative. I mean, what again Xi was saying is, look, there is another way. We can actually conduct international relations in a different way. And it's time finally that we did. And more countries around the world, I'm sure by now already a majority of countries agree with him.
So yeah, so the U.S. is throwing a tantrum almost like they cannot.
Every day. It's like a spoiled child. You take away its cookie and it smashes the furniture.
It cannot get what it wants from Russia, from China, even like from India, then it will throw a tantrum, go against the smaller country. They believe weaker countries to show the muscles.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
so childish. Okay.
It is. Yeah.
Last thing. What do you say that Trump is like into this nationalized Intel, taking, stake from Intel, but also US Steel, and even considering to take some kind of almost like a nationalized Lockheed Martin.
Yeah.
what is going on? I thought that the Republicans are for, free private enterprises, and now these are the things they would accuse Barack Obama or Bernie Sanders would do, but they're very quiet. What do you take on that?
Well, I mean, I mean, I think it goes beyond. It's actually in some ways different from what, say, Bernie Sanders was talking about. I don't expect Bernie Sanders would ever have done it, but this isn't genuine nationalization, at least not as far as I can see. It's rather an unholy relationship in which a state and corporate interests are merging.
Okay.
So you're bailing out and supporting corporate interests and basically failed companies like Intel, ones which some people claim are strategically important, but more importantly, lots of people have invested a lot of money in. Lockheed Martin is another case in point. So you bail them out and you give yourself a cut at the same time. It's not proper nationalization or public ownership or state ownership, as you have in China, for example. It's not like that. It's closer to the kind of very unhealthy corporatist oligarchical structures that existed, have existed in other places, and which famously were established in Italy under Mussolini and were called corporatism there, and which Mussolini claimed were one of the pillars of the fascist state that he had created.
Yeah, somebody even called it a capitalist with American characteristics. So, okay.
True.
Yeah. I was thinking that it's, the Nazis, right? It's also called what is called the Socialist Workers' Party, right? Something like that. So the German Nazis also trying to be more, I guess, intrusive. The government is more intrusive into private enterprises, right? So, and Mussolini did that too, and Trump is now,
absolutely. I mean, since you brought up Nazi Germany, I mean, the Nazis did this on a very big scale. I mean, there was the so-called Hermann Goering works, which took up a significant share of German heavy industry, and of course, this was in theory publicly owned. And was part of something called the 4-year plan. And the 4-year plan never existed. It was mythology. But what it really was again, a completely corrupt interconnection between industry and the state. And it meant that, and this is going to happen in the US as well, by the way, I am no doubt of this, there was an enormous amount of corruption around this because, of course, these entities do not form part of an integrated industrial state-directed system like you have with companies in China. I mean, so I mean, there is no way that Intel is going to be like the chip makers in China. I mean, it just isn't going to happen like that. I mean, that isn't what this is about at all. So you're going to see money from the government going to these companies. People who have connections to the government would have shares in them. They will get money out of it. It will all go round and round and round, and it will become deeply corrupt and very ugly. And I'm afraid it's part of the trend that we're seeing in the United States today. So corruption now spreading into the American industrial system. What's left of it? Boeing is going to end up this way too.
Do you think the Trump administration, I mean, maybe the US elite in general, they try to learn something from China, but not exactly. They kind of like believe that China has centralized the planning, that more concentrated the power in a way, so it's more efficient in a lot of ways. So they're trying to copy that. At the same time, they don't really do it what China is doing because like utilities, those kind of important companies that the government owned, but the government owns majority of the ownership, so that they can control the price, and so the individuals, American Chinese citizens will not be suffering high price in electricities or internet connections, those kind of things. That's not what the US is doing, but it kind of like a little bit trying to learn from China. Is that what they're doing?
Well, learn is, I think, I think there may be some element of imitation,
Okay.
if I can put it like that. But the Americans do not understand the Chinese economic system at all.
Mm-hmm.
They don't understand any part of it. I mean, this is so completely different from their own way of economic organization that, I mean, and given this complete absence of understanding, and given the extent to which even American policymakers take many of their ideas about China from charlatans, frankly, I mean, the Gordon Changs and people of that kind. I mean, you know, what they're going to try and copy is not going to bear any relation at all to the original. I mean, it'll be darkness and light. Same is true, by the way, in Russia. I mean, you know, the Russians, one of the things that happened in the mid-2000s was that Putin decided that he would concentrate industries, and he created Rosatom and Rostec and Rosneft and all of these things. But of course, again, the Russians did this within a very, very heavily structured, planned system in which, you know, if you understand the Russian economic system, which, by the way, is an outgrowth of the Soviet one. I mean, again, this isn't widely understood, but the economics minister at the time, who was Belousov, who's now the defense minister, he had strong connections with Gosplan. But anyway, they understood how to do planning, and they had all this. They created all the planning and proper mechanisms. And you could see how it works. So, for example, I mean, Russia's now trying to rebuild its chips industry, and it's going to have a lot more success than the Americans are. But I mean, you know, Rosatom is the lead company doing all of this, and you can see how it's working. I talk about Russia because it's the country whose economic structure I understand better. But the Americans just don't get any of this, because this isn't how they work at all, and that's why they fail. I mean, what they're going to end up with is a corrupt and stagnant hybrid, which is going to spread corruption further through the American system, because that's if you don't put the framework in place, and you don't have the mind and the imagination to make it happen, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, they don't quite understand. China actually, some areas the competition is extremely hard. You know, like if you look at EVs, the cell phones, and even chips, and there's a lot of competition, and the government doesn't pick winners or losers. The government just let the competition do the job. And that's how China developed all these industries. And so I think in the US, like Trump in particular, like to pick winners and losers and put in the government money and in there. That doesn't really solve the real problem. Like you said, it's going to be more of a corruption.
Yes.
But it's interesting, you know.
It's all very, 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 very interesting as the Americans try to sort of find their way forward as the world changes around them. And this is what I did want to. I mean, you know, I wanted to say. I mean, the meetings in Tianjin and Beijing, and to some extent also the precursor meeting, the BRICS meeting in Kazan last year, because to my mind, the SCO and BRICS are becoming part of the same community of institutions. It's reshaping the world. I mean, we are at an absolutely pivotal moment. And I just wanted to say to people in China that Xi Jinping's chairmanship of all of these very, very complicated set of meetings, I mean, very complicated. I mean, all these different leaders, you had to meet all of them, keeping the whole process moving forward is absolutely masterly. And he never put a foot wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, he makes it look easy, as Putin in his way does. It's not easy at all.
No. Yeah, it's interesting the countries who come, you know, for both events. It's like both Armenia and Azerbaijan, you know, they both went there, and it's kind of interesting. Okay. All right. Let's talk next week. It's always a lot to cover, so thank you so much.
And my pleasure. And have a great week until we
You
meet
too.
again.
Bye.
Bye.